All right. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on which coast you are joining us from. This is a Wave Warrior special broadcast for World Environment Day. We are joined today by two awesome gentlemen. We have Larry Mellum and Riley Starks of the Salish Center for Sustainable Fishing. I'm going to talk a little bit about why World Environment Day is important. We're in the middle of the Orca Action Month as well. And we have World Ocean Day coming up this weekend as well. So a lot happening. But if we could just kick off with some formal intros, that would be amazing. So take the mic, gents, either of you.
I'll start. I'm Larry Mellum. I'm the board president of Salish Center. I'm the owner of a small little chowder house down in Seattle called Pike Place Chowder, located at Pike Place Market. And Riley and I have worked together for several years on salmon recovery and environmental issues that this region faces.
And I am Riley Starks, the founder and executive director of Salish Center, whose goal it is to protect the fragile Salish Sea in every way we can, but especially the southern resident orca whales that are the apex predator and effectively the canary in the coal mine that we are now realizing is at a tipping point for survival.
So we are broadcasting right now in a number of different places. Folks, if you are watching this broadcast and you're passionate about the Salish Sea, you're passionate about ecosystems around the world in general, or just the southern resident orcas and their plight, we invite you to share this video with anybody who may find it interesting. But just for context, in case anybody who is watching this is not familiar with the story of the southern resident orcas, I'd love to dig into that a little, because whenever I've mentioned that I'm working with a nonprofit that's trying to help orcas, people are like, the orcas don't need help. They're an apex predator. They're, disrupting boats around the world. They're causing mayhem. Their supply of food is plentiful. All of those things are true, except when it comes to our southern resident orcas. Can we kind of just dig into the story of why that is?
Sure, I'll take that. The southern resident orcas have lived in this area here for millennia. And as it turns out, because the salmon population here was so plentiful forever, that's what they consume. They don't consume seals. They don't consume other types of fish. It's related to salmon. And more particularly, it's Chinook salmon, which were, again, very, very plentiful here. But as time has gone along and we began to develop this region with the European settlers and whatnot, first with fur trading and logging and whatnot, the human population that came in here began to affect this salmon population. And the salmon the southern residents are taught by their grandmothers what to eat, and they eat salmon. So, as we've gone along, all of a sudden this threshold of the salmon that are here and the opportunity for them to feed on them has been in sharp decline. And what it has caused is it causes them to starve to death because they don't know that there's other things for them to eat. And you have example after example of the baby orcas dying through starvation from not really understanding that there's other things for them to consume. It's a tragic tale. The one that's more prominent than any was Salish, the mother who carried her deceased baby around on her nose for 17 days and 1,000 miles in a show of grief. That grief was for us humans to frankly see, what we were doing to this region. And what we were doing to the region affects, the environment. It affects the future of this as Riley said, this is an apex predator. When an apex predator goes away, the environment and the ecosystem will crash. And we're here to try and help resolve that through recovery of the salmon population. We do that through a number of different means. One of which is selected fishing, which we can still do, and Riley can tell you all about that. And environmental work and restoring areas that salmon will grow up in. There are regions that the area that are dammed, and the salmon have a very difficult time getting past those dams on their way to their natal spawning grounds. All of these things we've done, and all of these things we can solve, and we're here to help make that happen.
So let's talk a bit about some of the practices that we are seeing. Well, first of all, just to back up on that, what is this the first time that any orca has been put on an endangered species list? Because they were listed as an endangered species very recently, right?
I believe it was in the 80s that they actually got listed towards the end of the 80s. And yes, although I think now there's another, I think the northern resident orcas are being listed. So that, I mean, it's anything that depends on salmon is in peril.
And to be put on an endangered list, it really is a crisis point.
Yeah, it's estimated that, and the study just came out a month ago, that the southern resident orcas, if their decline, or at least even the like staying the same, by 2050, they will have reached a point where there's no return. They will disappear. There's no going back. So we've got about 25 years really to reverse this trend. And there's positive signs. I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. It's funny. I was at a town hall meeting last night, and it was sort of about this thing, but about also living from your environment and how you can get closer to your environment. And I read a poem by Wendell Berry, the Kentucky philosopher farmer, who I have admired all my life. And it was a poem of hope, and it made me realize that my message has always been one of hope, hope tempered with the truth. And what Wendell Berry had to say in a nutshell is, inhabit the place where you live. Look at the place where you live. Stay in a place where you live, so you can learn that place and all of the things in it. Every animal, the trees, everything inhabits that space and requires care. And in turn, we as people require care. And if we can just take up this attitude, there is hope. I've seen hope in the 50 years that I've fished here in the Salish Sea. I've seen things get better for Dungeness crab, whose resource population has tripled since the 80s. The halibut, the local halibut here, the population has gone from practically zero to a healthy surplus that enables a commercial fishery. So if you take the long view, as Wendell Berry does, who's 89 right now, still kicking, you have to take the long view, and you can't expect short-term positive results, but you can expect long-term positive results.
So the region, where the Salish Sea is, up in the Pacific Northwest, has seen a lot of migration of folks that are not from that region, seen an influx of folks moving north from California as rents rise, and even folks as far as the East Coast migrating across to the PNW. So how big of a lift do you think we have to get people to actually be invested and really understand the kind of critical tipping point we're at right now?
That's a Larry question.
Well, the thing that's kind of interesting is there are a lot of young people and a lot of tech people who have moved into this area, and they want to know about this place. And I think we try and tell that story with Salish Center, that in ways that we have affected the environment here by the things that Riley has done with crab and with halibut to change the direction. And I believe that there are people who really are very, very interested now, and there are many people that are fairly young that have moved here that their concerns are about where they live and the environment that they have an opportunity to live within and help with the solutions that come their way. And I think we try to provide them with that knowledge that their being here can help. And is it a big stretch? It may be for some, but I think a lot of younger people here are very interested in their environment and very interested in seeing the place that they live become, it is already a beautiful and great place. But it can always be better, and there's much work that needs to be done environmentally here.
So let's talk about. Go ahead, Riley, please.
But Larry, didn't you say once that you thought this problem requires $100 million solution?
Yes,
I mean, you did,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's not it's not a we wish it could be better. It's not a hope that somebody's going to do something. The truth is, we need to do something. We, you, I, my neighbor, the person walking down the street. We need to do something. And it's World Environment Day, but every day should be World Environment Day. We are a part of this world, and we're killing it. We're choking it. And we don't have to. It does not have to be this way.
The reason for the idea that this is a $100 million project is when you consider the entire Salish Sea region, from which runs the Puget Sound area in Washington State out to the Strait of Juan de Fuca between Vancouver Island and Washington State, and then the inland waters of British Columbia. There are many, many things that we have done here that have created the problems that exist. One of them is net pen salmon farms that have been in the Northwest, and they're Atlantic salmon that are grown in these pens, and these pens create all kinds of issues with disease and sea lice, and that cause wild salmon who have to pass by these pens on their way back to their natal streams and going out to sea from their natal streams. And many, in passing by, get sea lice and die. The dams that have been created, which I mentioned earlier, many of them are unnecessary now. And when you consider most of them were to produce hydroelectric power, which was inexpensive, but with the number of new methods that are being created in generating energy, are all those dams necessary? And no, they're not. It creates warmer water, it creates ponds, it creates situations that limit the success of salmon making their way out to sea. There's, of course, all of the environmental things that have been washed into the Salish Sea from a growing region that has gone from a few thousand people to several million people over the last 100 years has created innumerable issues with the development forage fish and protection for the young salmon coming out. There's all of those things. That said, $100 million project, when you consider the number of people that live in this region and how little it would take for every family to donate just a little bit to this cause, I think a lot of this stuff can be resolved and be resolved very quickly. But it is a huge project. But over the next 20 years or so, if we consider it in those terms, the things that we can accomplish in those 20 years could be remarkable and can create all kinds of wonderful things for this region that sorely needs it.
And I think, and this is just kind of my observation, having worked with you both for the last 18 months and getting to know the region. I'm on the East Coast, but I've been getting to spend some time over there. There's a lot of people that really care deeply about the orcas, but everything is very fragmented. There's a lot of Facebook groups. There's some of which we're broadcasting in live right now. There's a lot of nonprofits, and it just seems like, as an overview, there's a lot of people who are really well intended and are raising little bits of money here and there, but there's no coalition that brings everything together and addresses these, like, as you put it, $100 million issues. And the way that we're kind of building in terms of how we're fundraising is we're going to look at it threefold. We think it's an education that needs to happen for future eco stewards, right? So it's looking at 9 and 10-year-olds, fourth graders, getting them just engaged and committed to protecting what will be their habitat, right? It's habitat restoration, and we're looking at that at kind of stage one, looking at funding underfunded scientists who are doing vital research. And then in addition to that, it's regenerative practices, it's sustainable fishing practices. So let's kind of dive into those three things. And let's touch first on the coalition. Like, why do we feel that a coalition is vital? How do we start? How do we get things moving?
Well, the coalition, I think, is because there's so many organizations, and I think everybody who is part of an organization believes that what they're doing is fantastic, but to some degree or another, it's limiting. My hope is that in the next year or so, we can put together what would be called Orca Days and put on an event in downtown Seattle on the waterfront and have the various different organizations all participate in this and help to fund it, but also be there to show all of the things that they're trying to do to accomplish what we all know is important to this region, which is the salvation of the southern resident orcas, and through that recovery of salmon, and through that recovery of the region. In an Orca Days event, I think would be the way that we could get the entire region on board to support the work that we're trying to do, but not just us, but the work that all of us are trying to accomplish.
And I think, going back to what you shared, Riley, about hope and being optimistic, we can show data, we can show examples of how and why it's vital to fund scientific research, and particularly kind of the lone wolf researchers, somebody like Alexandra Morton. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's one of the hopeful stories. It involves a pink salmon. So for those who don't know, most salmon have a 4-year life cycle. They start in the river as babies. They go down. They live for 4 years and come back to spawn. And so pink salmon is the only species, besides my dog right there, who really wants to go out.
Stella, you know what? She's going to start Frank barking next. That's usually how this goes. Frankie was barking through my last live, so it must be dog day. They want to participate in World Environment Day.
But But as I was saying, the pink salmon has been an incredible success story because as the river conditions have gradually improved in the Fraser River, they are super opportunistic. Being 2 years old, they don't necessarily have to go back to their natal stream. They'll spawn in a ditch on the side of the road if you let them, and they were coming back in huge numbers, and then suddenly began to decline. And over a 30-year period, they've declined enough to where it's very sporadic. The runs, start to look big and they don't show up big. And Alexander Morton, who 30 years ago went to the tip of Vancouver Island in Canada to study southern resident orca whales. She was a young marine biologist, and that's what she wanted her life to be like. And so she lived on the beach, and she noticed that all these pink salmon smolts or babies would wash up dead on her beach. And she started looking at them and realized that they all had sea lice, and some were covered with sea lice, but some only had one, and they were still dead. And so she started doing research, collecting data, and trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And so she turned her whole focus to these pink salmon smolt research, and she was shunned by the powers that be, the biologists and research agencies and politicians who controlled the cause of this, which she discovered to be the Atlantic Sea Farm net pens. And the BC government was allowing Norwegian Atlantic salmon farms to proliferate just right outside the Fraser River, hundreds and hundreds of them. And as they proliferated, the death toll rose. And she documented it. She couldn't get funding. She had bake sales, basically. She self-funded. She couldn't get published in peer-reviewed papers until a friend of ours that we're supporting, he has a nonprofit called Oceans Initiative, and he and his wife work with the southern resident orcas in the water, and he was able to get her published, and gradually other people started looking at what she was doing and believing it, and so 3 or 4 years ago, she was successful in having them dismantle 16 of the most egregious salmon net pens in the Discovery Islands, right off the mouth of the Fraser. And they were right in the path of all the baby salmon smolts that have to swim out on their way out to sea, who come out of the river with no armor. They have no scales whatsoever, because for 10,000 years there were no sea lice. there was nothing in those estuaries and the nearshore environments that could harm a salmon smolt. There were things that could eat them, but not something like this primordial sea lice and disease-infested soup, that surrounded these many pens that they had to swim directly through. And so 3 years ago, or I think it was 4 years ago now, they dismantled them, and 3 years ago was the first when they were completely gone. And she kept studying the smolts, the pink smolts that came out. And last year, was it last year? Yeah, we had a pink salmon year last year. Forget. So we get pink salmon only every other year. and here it's the odd numbered years. So we don't, like this year, we're not going to see any pinks at all. It's just the natural biological cycle. But anyhow, she wrote a paper last year, and she said, "This is my last paper. After 30 years of research, this is the last paper I'm going to do on the subject." And she showed her 2 years of research on the pink salmon smolts that were infected with sea lice, and started way up here on the chart. Where is my hand? There, way up here on the chart, and then ended up all the way at the bottom at the end of 2 years. And there was virtually no infected smolts. And she said, if this is true, then this is going to be, it'll show up in the pink salmon this year. And sure enough, we had a near record pink salmon run. And so it's another, it's a happy ending story, I think, because people are realizing that they made mistakes. They didn't realize they were going to destroy the natural ecosystem by putting in Atlantic salmon farms, but they have been convinced now that it's not healthy for the Pacific salmon. So that's good news, and we're hopeful that we're going to see big sockeye runs in the near future, as well as big pink salmon runs. And just to sort of connect the two, what she did and what we do, we're reef net fishermen, and reef netting is the most sustainable, most selective salmon fishery in the world. And in 2013, Yvon Chouinard, who used to own Patagonia, came down here because he heard about the fishery, and they were looking for doing some food. They wanted to form a company called Patagonia Provisions to help with the mission that Patagonia was involved with. And so he came down and he looked at our fishery and listened to what I had to say, and they became a partner in the pink salmon fishery. So they sell our pink salmon in the Patagonia Provision stores.
And just for folks who are trying to make the connect between why the fishing farms are a problem and why reef net fishing is really the solution, to note that this is also an 1800-year-old technique that was used by indigenous people. Like, what is the big vision here for? Is it getting rid of kind of commercial fishing and farms completely? Is that even a possibility? And then training people on reef netting? Like, what would be like an ideal situation if we could have anything within 5 years?
Well, so you have to take a look at the Salish Sea in context with Alaska. So Alaska is a gigantic state with multiple healthy fisheries, and not very many people, like 900 some odd thousand people. So so fishing methods that work up there can't work down here anymore. We're to the point, just like the orcas are, we're to a tipping point where we cannot afford to kill runs of other species of salmon while we're after a certain species, let's say pink salmon. We can't afford to kill the late run sockeyes who are having trouble going up the river just so that we can harvest the pinks. On the other hand, the pinks have to get harvested because part of the way that fisheries have operated once human intervention got there is if you overspawn a river, if you let too many fish up the river to spawn, it will actually destroy the spawning grounds. And this has happened. It's happened. I've seen it in Bristol Bay. One river, it hasn't actually ever recovered, and this was 30 years ago. It just so it's it's like it's not as easy as saying, oh, don't catch the fish, because some fish need to get caught, and it's good. It's good for everybody to have fresh wild salmon, or frozen wild salmon. Um, but down here, selectivity is paramount, and it's the only fishery really that exists down here that can guarantee that is reef netting, because we don't kill any of our fish. We catch them, keep them alive, um, and we sort the live fish, and the ones that should go back in the water, they go right back in the water, um, and with no harm. I mean, virtually no mortality. Whereas any other type of fishery, no matter how good you are with them, a slight injury will multiply itself, and by the time they get up the river, they won't be able to make it to spawn.
I think one of the things I would just add to this is reef net fishing is considered a terminal fishery, meaning that the fish, these are migratory fish. They start in the river, they end their life in the river. And typically they will, in most instances, go back to the river that they were born in. And in Alaska, there's a great deal of fishing that happens out in the open ocean. And most of the fish that go to Alaska, it's the migratory path of all of the salmon that grow in this region. And if we were to try to change the fishery to a terminal fishery, meaning that you can't catch the fish unless they are returning to a specific river, and you have the ability to know that those fish are going to that river, so they are netted either in the river or as they're approaching the river. I think you have a better way of managing the fishery. What we found out is that 90% of the Chinook salmon that are in the ocean in Alaskan waters actually are from British Columbia, Washington, or Oregon rivers. And so they're never given the chance to return to those streams, which it's a huge problem. But if we were to restrict open ocean fishing and return it only to terminal fishing where the fishing can be done where the fish are returning to those streams, we will resolve a lot of problems.
Well, and give more food to the orcas, because the Chinook that are up there, they don't even have a chance of getting back down here and getting in the way of the southern resident orcas.
Right. So it's a huge problem.
And just like so much has been done to try and get Chinook to the orcas. Like I'm always blown away by that story that you shared with me, Riley, about them actually kind of launching the orcas a la t-shirt gun style. Like, just can you tell people about that?
Yeah, it was about 5 years ago when Tlaquah had her baby that Larry talked about, and I mean it stunned the world, and it stunned us, but it stunned the Lummi Nation even more, because they felt they truly believed that the orcas are their cousins, their
going relatives,
their family. Yeah, and they take it personally, and they wanted to do something. I mean, anything, right? Anything, to because they didn't want to stand with their hands in their pockets. And so I got a phone call. It was during the fishery, and someone from the Lummi Nation asked if we could save all of our king salmon from the reef net that we caught, and then call them at the end of the day, and they would come and pick them up live and put them on their boat in a live well, and their intent was to shoot them out of the boat in a water cannon. toward the orcas. And the reason of that is they didn't want any orca to think that humans were involved in these releasing these fish. So it was supposed to be, oh, the fish just came from nowhere.
Not just flying fish that come out of the sky.
Yeah, but they came to us, reef net fishermen, because we're the only gear type that could keep these fish alive after harvest. I mean, they couldn't go to anybody else, and I think that you need to think about that. It didn't work. It was too little, too late, really, for them. But it still, pointed out to me that that we're living in harmony. We're fishing in harmony.
I think we're going to meet again on Saturday for World Ocean Day. And what I would love to do is talk more on Saturday about regenerative agriculture and the seaweed farm. But I think one other thing we should touch on today is the dungees. I know we didn't really go into the dungees, but Riley, you saw a problem. You even rented a helicopter to go observe the problem. Like, you took action. Like, these kind of acts of, leadership, acts of research, acts of action take funding. And these are the kind of actions that we want to be able to fund for people who are actively doing scientific research now and future eco warriors as well. Talk to us about that experience, what the action that you took and the results that it yielded.
Yeah, so I started fishing here on the Salish Sea in 1973. I bought my first boat, and I started fishing Dungeness crab. And at the same time, I had graduated in political science from Western Washington University. And so after 2 years or 3 years in the fishery, I helped start a group called the Intersound Crab Association, and I was the president. And we noticed at that time there were 16 bottom trawlers, draggers, we call them, who scour the ocean bottom after groundfish. And they are very, very, very destructive. And there's been campaigns for 30, 40 years to get rid of bottom trawlers all over the world, because they've even done satellite imaging of the swath that the bottom trawlers do in the ocean, where you can see it's just, it's like plowing it up, but when you're plowing it, you're not seeding it for anything new. You're destroying what's there. And so we noticed that a couple of the draggers out of Blaine were going into Birch Bay after flounder. And flounder are the lowest value bottom fish there is. And I was a commercial or a professional filleter back when I first started fishing, and in the wintertime. And when we would get flounder, we would only fillet the white side. The brown side, the top side, we'd just toss it because it had no value. And so, but these guys were after the flounder, and they would go right through the rookery of the Dungeness crab at a time when the dungeons were molting. And I don't know if you've ever seen a Dungeness crab that is molting or has molted, but they literally open the back of their shell and they crawl out of it. And they crawl out with an intact like quasi shell that is like paper that you could take, with your hand, and you could just destroy it just by squeezing it. And that's when the draggers would go after the flounder. And we decided to rent a helicopter to fly over one of these guys when they were pulling up their bag. So draggers, they drag and then they grind up their bag, and the bag comes over the stern, and you could see the jelly oozing out of the bag of thousands and thousands of Dungeness crab, forever destroyed. And so we got this film, and this was in 1975, 76. So it was, clunky camera, helicopter. Anyway, we gave the footage to Fish and Wildlife in the state of Washington, and they added it to their litany of reasons why bottom trawling was the absolute worst way to harvest anything in the Salish Sea. And about, I'm going to say, 10 years later, maybe 12 years later, they finally retired all of the trawl permits in the Salish Sea, both Canada and down here. They retired them all, which took enormous political will and courage, because they were taking away somebody's livelihood that they had done for more than a generation, but it was destroying the environment, and it's a kind of thing that we're trying to gin up a little public support to help political will on the part of the fisheries managers to start realizing that they need to get more selective about the way they harvest salmon. So the upshot of this is that literally, I think that took about 12 years, and then another, I'm going to say 10 years. But the Dungeness stocks, which in my day were 5 million for the whole inner sound, 5 million pounds. Today you have over 12 million pounds, so almost triple the number of crabs that existed then. And not only the number is bigger, but the crabs are bigger. There are so many now that a lot of them go under harvested, and they're allowed to grow another year. And so in the last 4 years, sports crabbing, I don't commercially crab anymore. I've handled the biggest crabs of my entire life, and I've fished 17 years as a commercial crabber and handled thousands and thousands of crab. But I'm telling you, the biggest crab, one was 9.5-inch carapace, which is a third bigger than legal, and it weighed 3.5 pounds.
Wow.
Normal is 1.5 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just hearing you talk and realizing that this was like over 40 years ago, 50 years ago almost.
Yeah.
You were like the OG original wave warrior. You were a fierce advocate who did this because he felt deeply passionate about protecting the sea, and you did it out of your own pocket. Like, we just need more Rileys, more wave warriors, and let's fund that. Let's fund those fierce advocates, because I know they're out there. I know there are people who care the way that you do. So that's one of our biggest missions here is to empower and enable folks who will do the real work. So yeah.
One of the things that we've talked a little bit about is these net pen farms, and it's been remarkably successful up in along the Fraser. But there's still over, something in the area of 3,000 net pens in the British Columbia waters. And the way that it's set up is these Norwegian companies have come in and they've built infrastructure, they've built schools, they've created jobs and opportunities. That's not something that you just go in and say blindly, okay, we can't allow these anymore, we'll see you later, bye. We've got to do something that can create an opportunity for these people who have these are good jobs that they've had, and they have livelihoods and families that live in these remote communities. And so in order to do that, we need to have solutions for them as well. And one of the solutions, frankly, is reef net fishing, which Riley's practiced for decades. But it is an opportunity that we can provide people. We can teach them how to reef net, but we also need a means in order to provide them the equipment, and we can provide them training and the skills. But these are 1,000 people that we need to try and get trained in an entirely new method for fishing for salmon. That and again, it's part of the $100 million project that I speak of. But that's a huge project and a huge and very, very important part of finding solutions for the region's salmon population and for the recovery of our orcas.
And just to kind of put that into like immediate, tangible context, we can train a reef net fisher on a seasonal scholarship for about $30,000. We can currently only really accommodate 2 at a time. With bigger resources, we can expand our capabilities with that. But also in terms of like building a reef net rig, it's going to cost around about $100,000. So to kind of teach a man to fish or person to fish and empower them with the equipment, we're looking at, $130,000. So we really do need all the support that we can get. And we're reaching out to the community. We are applying for grants. But hopefully you can see, just the intent here is not about just these kind of quick Band-Aid fixes. We are thinking about this long-term for the future. So, gents, any final thoughts before we wrap this up and push to Saturday?
Well, my thought is on Saturday, I want to get to kind of a segue of this, because another job that could replace the salmon net pens is growing seaweed. And we are enabling the Lummi Island Sea Greens to have become the first commercial seaweed farm in the state of Washington, and it's in infant stage right now here and in Canada. But as it builds, it could easily replace those salmon net pen jobs.
Yep. Something that we potentially will be able to offer scholarships for as well, maybe starting next year. So definitely something to we can dive deeper, pardon the pun, on Saturday. Maybe even with you live from the Salish Sea, or potentially on a boat.
Well, I just would like to thank the people who have signed on and who've listened, and hopefully you see what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish. The goals are huge, and it's a very, very important piece of this region in order to keep it the same beautiful place that it always has been, and we always hope it will be.
And don't forget that August 17th, we have our Reef Net Festival right here on Lummi Island.
That's right.
We have it it is the 8th annual, every 3rd Saturday in August. It's an all-day affair, 11 to 8:30, live music, wine and beer gardens, a lot of informational and arts and crafts booths, really good food. I know Pike Place Chowder takes part in it, but also we have our salmon, local. It's all local. Everything's local. And boat rides take you out to see the reef net. So it's very fun. Put it on your calendar, August 17th.
I'm going to drop a link for tickets underneath this video. So if you're watching this, definitely get to the Reef Net Festival. It's fabulous. And there was an amazing paella last year as well. So it was a treat. All right, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Please do share this video with anybody who may find it inspiring, uplifting, or just educational. And we will be back on Saturday for World Ocean Day. Take action this month. If you can't afford to support, just resharing, letting people know, talking to members of your community can go a long way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.